I love the Gospel of John. It's full of great miracles and wonders and sayings and a real invitation from Jesus to come closer to Christ. It's a real personal invitation throughout this book. But one thing I still struggle with in the Gospel of John is a phrase that John uses throughout that you may have just heard and noticed, is that throughout the Gospel of John, John keeps mentioning a group called the Jews. And we, 2,000 years later, know how harmful that phrase and the use of it can be. We know how it has caused not just enmity, but terrible atrocities and horrific losses of life. But part of it is that we've lost some of the context from where this was written, that the Gospels were not written from people outside of any Jewish context. It was written mostly from people who either grew up Jewish or were part of churches that were a mix of Jews and Gentiles. And so when the saying, it's not so much one religion talking about another, it's people mostly who would have still considered themselves to be Jewish followers of Christ. That would be talking sort of amongst themselves, talking amongst divisions and things going on in the life of that. I still struggle with that saying. I still struggle with the word. But it helps sometimes for me today when I read this to remember to engage with communities of faith, especially our Jewish brothers and sisters, and to not keep these words or assumptions hidden behind a wall. So that's why I loved a couple weeks ago that we got every May here at Bon Air Presbyterian to join together an interfaith trialogue. And a couple weeks ago, we met at the Islamic Center of Virginia, right on Buford Road. It was a beautiful evening, and we had a number of different speakers from faith traditions speak about what these last 2 years have looked like in COVID. And if you think we've been struggling alone in COVID, I have to tell you that is not the case. We've all, from all walks of faith, it's been a difficult 2 years, figuring out what to do, how to stay safe, how to come together, how to feel connected. There's been lots of loss and grief and struggle and new ways and ideas, and it was a great evening. A number of speakers were there that evening from the different faith communities, including Imam Amar Amonette from the Islamic Center, Reverend Michael from the Methodist Church, and Rabbi Yehuva from our friends across the street at Congregation Or Ami. And I found it really interesting when Rabbi Yehuva spoke. She spoke about the congregation's response to what to do to COVID, especially at the beginning. And there was a big debate, a big struggle. Well, should we meet? That's something commanded to meet each week, or should we prize safety and health? And Rabbi Yehuva said that throughout Jewish history and tradition, that life and health and healing are always the top priority. Even on the Sabbath, that is the top priority. That to care for others, to heal, to protect, and save life is not just permitted, but it's blessed and allowed. I loved her saying that, and I will carry that with me as it really helps me dive into these scriptures that we have for today. For this reading, this miracle that comes from the Gospel of John is one of many where Jesus heals or does miracles or helps people on the Sabbath, and then right away some religious people get upset at Jesus. Remembering Rabbi Yehuva's words, so I remember that this isn't necessarily just a Jewish custom. That is probably a challenge of all of us religious people, and maybe just people in general, that we have rules and the ways we've always done things and customs. And it's hard to let those go, even when we can help other people. The Sabbath rules weren't so much a thing where the Jewish faith was all about rules and customs, and us Christians, well, we know better. We're all about grace and life, but it's a challenge for all of us religious people to ask the question, are we going to favor laws and customs and the ways we've always done things? Or are we going to see the needs of our neighbors and reach out with love and mercy, even when it might change or shake things up? I love that. And today, Jesus decides the second. Jesus decides to change and shake things up, even if it's a little bit different. Jesus comes on the Sabbath day to this pool, and there he knows that there's some of customs of what's allowed and what's not allowed, but he also notices this person who's been waiting by the pool for 38 years. And for 38 years, nobody has come up to him. It's hard to imagine that 38 years. It's such a long amount of time. It's almost unfathomable. I can kind of imagine someone lying by a pool for 38 days, maybe 38 weeks, which is almost a year, maybe 38 months, but 38 years. I can't even imagine what those 38 years would have been like for the man to come every day. We don't find out what his illness was, but most likely he was someone who could not walk on his own. So he needed the help that our children would have offered, maybe being carried in or a hand or someone. For 38 years, no one, he says, helps him come in. I wonder over those 38 years, how many people who came to the pool even saw him or noticed him or asked him a question or heard anything about his life or his story. What I love with Jesus in this scene is not only that he approaches him and dares to maybe change up laws or customs or traditions, but that Jesus as well comes and before acting, before just doing something, he asks the man a question. He asks him, what is it that you're seeking? He asks him, do you want to be made well? One thing I love about Jesus' miracles is they all look different. If you go through the gospel story, there isn't one way that Jesus heals. There are many, many different ways. And at first, it's a little puzzling. Why is there for some people that Jesus simply says a word and they're healed? Why is it for some that he just tells a messenger, go and tell the person who sent you, and they're healed that way? And then there's others that Jesus touches. There's others that Jesus spits in mud and gets that mud together and rubs it in their eye. There's others that Jesus heals them right away. There's others that Jesus asks them questions first. There's others that Jesus says, rise and be well. There's others that won't be made well for a few days. And we may wonder, why is there so many different ways that Jesus acts and responds and heals people? And it wasn't until I had a conversation with a pastor maybe a decade ago that the pastor said, well, it's because Jesus knows that each person is different. Each person is unique. And there's no one right way to respond and care and love for each person. We need to know the person. We need to know their unique gifts, their unique experiences, their unique challenges. We need to know all those before we can offer our love, our care, our healing. And that's what Jesus does this day. Is before offering healing, he sits down with this man and he asks him, do you wish to be made well? And from that ask, the man's able to share with Jesus so much more about his life, his story, his struggles, his dreams, his hopes. And then Jesus says to the man, get up, take your mat. You are made well. It's that last part that we often pay attention to and celebrate. And I'm sure for that man, it was forever life-changing and a great joyful celebration. But I also believe that first part, the part of Jesus sitting down and simply asking him, what is it that you need? How is it that you are seeking help? What can I offer? Was just as important. So much of the time, we as people in the world, and especially maybe we as people in the church, can make assumptions. We can always do things the way we've always done them. We can serve people thinking, well, this is the way we've always served. That's how we're always going to do it. We can welcome people. This is the way we've always welcomed. That's how we're always going to do it. Without actually taking the time to see and hear the person right in front of us, to notice them and to see them as who they are, as unique. We can also, I have to admit, as Presbyterians, sometimes be a little rigid, as of course we are always about doing things in proper and good order. We like meetings to follow a certain process. We want it to be done on time. Worship should never be over an hour. Let's keep things in the ways we've always done them. But sometimes it's a little bit challenging for us as Presbyterians to see and get out of some of those rigid ways we've always done things, to allow the work of the Spirit and to seek not just our own policies and ways and rules, but what's best and how we can love and serve that person in front of us. And I have to confess to you this day that I am definitely not immune from that. And I want to tell you a story that's honestly not one of my brightest moments. It was a few years ago, and I was working at an overnight shelter in Williamsburg, Virginia. It functioned a lot like Caritas does here in this area, especially as it did before they had their permanent shelter and would go from church to church. There, I was with a group from our church helping overnight. And each night we'd welcome members of our community, about 25 women and men, to come in and have a well-made meal, have a safe and warm place to sleep overnight, shower and breakfast, and leave the next morning. And like a lot of these great overnight programs, the morning would come very early. I'm not sure if that was the way Caritas was, but almost always it would be people would need to leave by 6 a.m., not get up at 6, but leave by 6. So people had to get up at 5 to repack everything, take showers, have breakfast, pack lunch, and go. And because of that early hour, they had a very good policy. It was a very good rule that they wanted everyone in by 9 p.m. That made a lot of sense. We didn't want people coming in every hour disrupting sleep. We really sleep is very important. We should very value sleep and rest. And so it was a very good policy. I was there that night with some other volunteers doing the overnight shift. And right around 9 p.m., almost everyone we expected to come had been in. We had dinner. Everyone went out for smoke breaks, came back in, and went to sleep. And by 9:30, lights were off, and we could hear people after their long days were crashing. I was up talking with the other volunteers for another hour when at 10:30 p.m. that night, we heard a knock at the back door. I went to see at the door, and there was a man standing in front of me with a bag, a big duffel bag. And he said, I'm come in for the night. And before I could say anything else, I said back to him, I'm sorry, we're supposed to close at 9 p.m. And I didn't make space for any other words. And the man, obviously very upset and trying for himself, thinking where he would go for the rest of that night, turned and left before there was any other words or questions. I didn't think too much else about it. I followed the policy and the rules. Everything seemed fine until that next morning, I found out that man worked at a nearby restaurant, and his shift ended at 10 p.m. that night. It has haunted me forever since. That because of my failure to ask a question, because of my failure to listen, because of my failure to be open and to be caring and compassionate and to stick to the rules, that this man had to spend a winter night outside alone instead of in our safe house of shelter. And that's something that stuck with me and haunted me and still turns my stomach this day. And it still invites me to ask, what is going to lead me going forward in whatever I do, in service and fellowship and teaching and being a part of a church and being part of a wider community? I believe rules and policies are really good. The rules of the Sabbath might be something we actually need more of in our own crazy and hectic lives. In our culture that always tells us to do more, to seek more, to have more, the Sabbath would be a really great reminder. It's not a bad policy or rule at all. But I wonder, is it the rule that should guide me? Or is it the sense of compassion, the sense of seeking the welfare of the person in front of me? Is it the love of Jesus Christ? As I read this story of Jesus meeting this man by the pool, I'm reminded of the choice Jesus made to seek love, to seek mercy, to seek welfare above all else, and to do so by fully seeing and hearing the person in front of him. May we do the same. Amen.